Kalon. I am the host of the Marketeers Clubhouse. And in the Clubhouse today, I'm not going to ramble on because I really want to get to talking to my guest today. I have Scott Bowers. I've been waiting to talk to you for a long time. You have been very generous with your time. You've helped me with a few sort of side projects. And we have some very solid mutual friends, one of which is Pierre Martin, who there's a wanted poster for my poor co-host who is God knows where. He never shows up. I love him to death, and hopefully he's out there in the world. I'm going to drive through America next month. I'm going to do my best to find Pierre. I'm sure I'll find him somewhere. So, Scott, welcome. Give us a little breakdown of you, young Scott.
Okay. Well, first of all, Jamie, super stoked to be here, and thank you for a very flattering introduction. I grew up in Southern California. I was the son of a fireman, and if anyone knows fireman families, firemen have a lot of time off, and we tend to have a lot of different sports we play in. So I kind of grew up in the Southern California zone of BMX racing, motocross, just that really cool vibe. Matter of fact, I'll go back and say my favorite all-time movie is a movie called On Any Sunday, if you guys want to go.
Of course. Yeah. Okay, so, I'm going to drop in one mini reference since you just mentioned that. One of my greatest things ever in the bike world, Mert Lawwell was in that movie. Yep. I designed a suspension system years and years ago that has done pretty well. At a trade show a million years ago, Mert Lawwell, who was transitioning and building some stuff in the mountain bike world at the time, who was one of my heroes, came up and actually told me that what we were building was the ticket. And I have never been more honored or happier in my life than to have met that guy there from that movie, because it was one of my favorites. So
that's really cool.
Sorry for the little side note there.
Not at all. But you know what I was getting at with this is, you know, growing up as a kid in Southern California during the emergence of really kind of the true action sports movement. You know, to me, it started out with surf and BMX and motocross, and it was just really cool being a kid during that time. So during high school, played some team sports, kind of had a falling out with a baseball coach, dropped team sports altogether, went to work for Sport Chalet. And I hadn't skied yet at about 16 years old, but I just loved the sport. And so I started to get into skiing, and I worked in the ski shop at Sport Chalet, and that opened my eyes to this whole new sport in the mountains, which I just fell in love with passionately.
Freedom.
So graduated high school, decided to take a year off of college. Grades weren't where they needed to be. Ultimately, I actually wanted to go to med school, believe it or not. How I ventured off that path was probably a good thing. So I decided right out of high school to move to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. I met a girl, no romantic interest. Her mom was a buyer for a ski retailer at the time called Sport Stalker that had several retail locations throughout Colorado. So started in Steamboat, worked there for 2 years, and they transferred me to the Vail Beaver Creek Valley to open up ski shops. And that was roughly about 1982. During that time, I started skiing moguls pretty heavily, then started competing on the Pro Mogul Tour, not really at a high level competitive side of things. But it just continued my passion with the sport. And during that time, I got to know a guy by the name of Greg Arnett, who later on founded Arnett Sunglasses. But Greg was a director of sports marketing at Oakley. And he ultimately was my goggle sponsor. And he and I became very good friends. And I got to a point to where it was time to get a real job. Like if I didn't move out of the Vail Valley and be a ski bum, I had to make something different in my life. So at this point, I had completely blown off college. And so I spent a quick year in New England as a ski rep for, back then, it was Elon, Gatesay, and Dolomite. And I worked for an individual named Peter Kidd. And then Greg said, no, you're a California guy. You got to move back to California, work for Oakley. And I'm like, sounds cool. And so that was 1987. I started at Oakley in May of 1988. The company was roughly $8 million in revenue that year. And I started out as a sports marketing manager. I managed a ton of different sports, obviously from ski, snowboard, jet ski, beach volleyball, a little bit of mountain bike. But that was my introduction to Oakley. And so I spent 2 years in sports marketing at Oakley. I saw the sales guys at this point were making all the money because Oakley was skyrocketing in popularity. And so I jumped quickly into sales management. I was a regional sales manager, then a national sales manager, and then they pulled me back over to become vice president of sports marketing when we turned public.
Right.
And at that point, we had roughly about 500 athletes worldwide under endorsement. And, you know, the belief that we had at that time is that if we were able to get product on the world's best, and that product turned into editorial exposure, was the most authentic exposure the brand could receive. Much more important than paid advertising, contrived advertising. We believe that if Greg LeMond was winning the Tour de France or Glenn Plake was skiing in another movie, the examples in the editorial of seeing our product on the world's best was the most authentic way to drive the brand. So that was really, at that time, the cornerstone of Oakley marketing.
Does your brand need some help in the trade marketing department? Manage your sales tools with Regulator's easy-to-use features. Whether it's fixtures or displays, POP, custom art or promo products, you can submit single or bulk orders for all your locations within minutes, using a simple, streamlined process. Deliver content, manage your budget and view the market, all from the palm of your hand. Move up to 10 times faster than your competitors and capture all the opportunities that put your brand on top. Visit brandregulator.com for more information.
So you were running sports marketing very heavily from like up until 2001, and then you went up another level, I think, right?
Yeah, at that time, we had some leadership changes. I was running, for the most part, global sports marketing, and it was decided that it was time that I take over all of global marketing. So I moved into what they called at the time was a senior vice president of brand development and also e-commerce. So e-commerce now is starting to play a really, really big role in our organization. But I want to go back and touch on something that I think is really, really valuable for the listeners to think about, because you talk about how Oakley pivoted and then skyrocketed. And I think of two things that really mattered a lot for Oakley during those formidable years, where a lot of brands get hung up. They tend to hit a plateau and they get complacent, and then they no longer can figure out how to succeed farther. And a lot of it is fear of growth, fear of not being core anymore. That was a common used term in the action sports world. And Oakley was faced greatly with that. So here we're born in action sports, dominating in surf, skate, motocross, snowboard, so on and so forth, a little bit of dabbling in triathlon, road cycling for performance. But we were struggling on how do we go mainstream but hang on to our core. And there were really two factors that played into that. One was just this idea that it's not a difference of being not mainstream and mainstream. It's a matter of combining them both. That we can be mainstream and still remain as cool as possible. But the biggest advantage Oakley had, and this was especially important for sports marketing, is our founder, Jim Gennard, was such a brave visionary when it came to product design. And so we could take some of the most outlandish styles at the time and put it on these most meaningful athletes across a variety of sports. So now we're making this decision to say, hey, surf and skate's cool, but how about golf and baseball and basketball? And let's sign Michael Jordan and put him on our board of directors. And how about product seating and the Tom Cruise scenario on Mission Impossible? Those things just exploded the brand from a popularity standpoint. And I really feel it was a brave move at our time to be able to step into that realm, because surf especially was such a sensitive sport that once you became popular east of the 405 freeway or Pacific Coast Highway, you were no longer cool. But we found that there was this energy by combining all these sports that it didn't matter if it was action sports, traditional sports. These athletes were so stoked to be part of the brand that there wasn't this idea that, Oakley sold out. We really, really managed that well and got through kind of those levels of growth that a lot of companies just seem to get complacent or miss, or they don't take a brave idea forward and get exposure out of it. And so I think that was really meaningful. And I really like to talk to the bravery of the brand and the willingness of the teams to really, really push the envelope when it came to brand exposure and brand disruption overall. It was really a fun time.
How empowered were you to run with brand? How tight was the decision-making on the inner circle? Were you guys super fast? Like, it didn't feel like there was a committee that was actually running this. It was 4 or 5 people doing hard decisions and going. What was the reality of it?
No, it's a very true statement about it. We had a senior leadership team of roughly about 7 leaders. Jose was obviously one of those running the international business. But when it came to brand, the times that Colin and Jim and I spent together it was just, the brand became innate in us, that we could see something and respond in a brand right way immediately. The concern always is how do you translate this innate sense that you've gained on the brand over, for me, working there for 25 years, how do you translate that down through the organization? Because as organizations grow, you have employees that try to take the brand into their own agenda. They want the brand to be something different. Now we have societal and cultural demands on brands that change them. But
yes, we do.
So we always called ourselves the brand gatekeepers, that we were involved in every decision made. We had a glimpse into every part of the business as we grew globally. And, really, like I said, and there were others that were really engaged in it too. I think Peter Yee had a strong, obviously being head of design at the time, he had a strong point of view on brand that translated well. Brian Takumi was another brand keeper. We had these people that were just these gatekeepers of the brand all the time. And so while Jim and Colin and I were probably at the lead of it, we had others that were very in common sense and thinking that we had. However, we did face a challenge towards my later years. When Jim decided to sell the business, we were acquired by Luxottica.
Yep.
At that point, Colin and I, for the most part, then took over the brand. And here we have Luxottica putting a lot of pressure on what they think we should be. And at that point, Colin and I were so concerned that if we didn't put a legacy in place of what was most valuable to Oakley, what would happen in the years to come? Would Oakley maintain this ethos that was so interesting and so unique? And so after Jim left, Colin and I put it on ourselves to develop what we called ultimately the Oakley 5.
Right.
And what we really did is we went back and we engaged with a lot of employees that had been there for many, many years. And we rediscovered what Oakley does or is doing when it's at its very best. It didn't have to be current time. It could have been 25 years ago, but rediscover what, those guiding principles, so to speak. And, we did this 15 years ago, so there's a lot of brand speak around the same kind of work. But to us, it was like, what are the most important things that we need to hand down to all the employees as we grow? What is the Bible? What are these values or principles that we have to just basically put in stone that will help in decision-making going forward? And so we worked incredibly hard for almost a year and a half in developing the Oakley 5. And the Oakley 5 is pretty legendary. I hope today it's still in place at Oakley.
It is. It absolutely is. And I have a note in my book that says Oakley 5. Like, that is a referenced, like, I know that's a thing. And it is, it's the last thing that you put in that is keeping the true north of the brand. And one, because I still work with that brand and I love that brand. Thank you. Because out of everyone you've referenced, there's the Oakley 5 and Brian Takumi. That's it. That's who's left in this organization that's got this long history. Yeah. And thank God for Brian Takumi. He is amazing. He is my friend. He is honest and sharp, and keeps the lifeblood of what was left of Oakley and that management that made it so amazing, keeps it going. And the 5 is still a component of it. So that as a brand, so there's brand marketing and there's brand stewardship.
Yeah.
You were being a brand steward and knowing that you were going to leave. It's like you put something in place before you got orged out so that the organization, the organism that is Oakley, knows what it is. Mm-hmm. And not everyone would do that. And kudos to you and Colin for drilling that through. And it's simple and it's clean. It's this beautiful mandate about what the brand is. And I don't believe that exists in many brands today. They have like these kind of wishy-washy things, maybe, random sort of guidelines, but nothing that actually speaks to the soul of that. So that's a thumbs up. A big thumbs up.
Well, thank you. It's some of my most proudest work, because when you put your heart and soul into a brand like this for so many years, you hope. I mean, our hope was always that Oakley would be our last job. That was always a mantra around Oakley, is that Oakley will be our last job. But,
Right.
the Luxottica thing was real. And it was just really, really important that we left this legacy in place that hopefully continued to be the guiding light of the brand, the rules of the brand, the filters of all the decision making going forward, that people would always go back. Because as we see in brands, where brands tend to fail is that either they lose to your point, they lose their founder, their visionary. They have change in leadership. They have change in ownership. And through those processes, brands clearly lose their way. And then they ultimately find themselves not knowing who they are or what they're doing. They might be making a product, but for what reason?
Exactly.
That was our fear with Oakley, is that we can't this is a 100-year brand. We cannot let Oakley fail because somebody didn't know who it was anymore. And that was the purpose of that work.
Well,
and it was great. I remember you were probably at the sales meeting when we rolled it out.
Yeah.
1,000 employees, from around the world came in for, 2 different presentations, and it was an amazing day and you saw the codification. Like, all the employees just went, yes, now I knew who we are. This is amazing. We've got to carry this legacy forward. It was so binding and it was really cool the way it brought this whole culture really, really together in an alignment.
From brand development to simple market executions, 54 Blue helps brands of all sizes grow with sustainability in mind. Their full-stack range of services include print, fabrication, design, web, interactive, content marketing, brand consulting, creative strategy, and more. Join some of the world's largest brands and lean on 54 Blue for your next go-to-market. Visit 54blue.com for more information.
When I look at you, I look at a really well-rounded marketer, someone who understands. And there's a standard sort of structure that exists in marketing, in the C-suite still today, and there's new roles coming in. I want to speak to one of the new roles. But in a lot of instances, you have CEO, CFO, maybe a chief revenue officer who's in charge of sales, maybe. In a lot of instances, that sort of falls onto the CFO or the CEO, and they kind of play with that collectively. And then there's a CMO. You've been in the role of CMO. Ever increasingly, brands are having a hard time. They're seeing successes from startups where the founder is very involved and the founder can cross boundaries from every functional group all the way through. And when there is a product, and there's so many examples, I'll use the obvious and most easiest is the Steve Jobs example, where his agenda would run every department all the way through. And while he was looking at prototypes, he was thinking about marketing concepts and sales pitches. And he was also able to run into the finance department and make promises, like, hey, we're going to launch an iPhone and we're going to take all of the revenue that exists in other products that we should be using to generate sales on those products. We're going to put it all directly against the iPhone. And so he had the ability of crossing these boundaries. In brands that get older and the founders disappear and they lose this agility, there's a new role. I don't necessarily know if it's new, but there's a growing role called CGO, which is Chief Growth Officer. And when I look at you, you have everything that's there. Pierre, I also believe, is a CGO quality human. He understands finance. He understands, like, you have even just something crazy. You understand the logistics of sending a single fixture to a Dick's Sporting Goods and all of the things that can go wrong with that. Plus, you can understand the financial implications of having, $100 million of CapEx fixturing being built in China and the distribution of that into the globe. There's these, you hold this very micro macro thing, and you've trained yourself into that position. What's your thoughts on the new sort of CGO world that's coming to try re-energize and make the incumbents more agile again is sort of how I see it shaking out. And then the control of brand through the functional groups and all those things. Like, how do you're the expert in this. I want to know your thoughts on what I just said. Am I crazy? Where is this going?
No, I love this topic. And I don't know if chief growth officer is the right description, because growth quite often used loosely is a scary term to me, because growth without brand development never really works very well. Okay.
That's a perfect answer from a chief growth officer, by the way.
Because when you build a brand, it's a constant balance between revenue growth and brand health. If you tilt one or the other too far, either you grow revenue too much and you ignore the brand, then that revenue is sooner or later just going to fade away because the brand has no sense or soul to it. If you're too brand and you don't focus on driving the revenue, then you might have a really cool brand, but you're poor. So in today's world, as a chief marketing officer, chief brand officer, chief growth officer, I look at almost every piece of the company relates to brand development. We can call it marketing. Marketing is a very ambiguous term that can be defined on what you do with it. But when you're thinking about chief brand officer, chief growth officer, what's really critical to know is all these parts to the company are all integrated in some way or another. So if you're pushing revenue too hard and not enough brand, you got to always balance that out. If you have great product design but terrible supply chain, well, then that causes the brand to tilt in a different way. If you are overspending in marketing and not paying your finances, that tilts things a different way. And so you really become this orchestrator of these silos. Because quite often in these companies, each one of these departments tend to silo. And sometimes there's a lot of animosity between, say, marketing and sales. Animosity.
Sometimes there's animosity between sales and marketing. What? That's unbelievable. I run around trying to break those silos down. They drive me insane. Okay. So,
but as a chief growth officer or chief brand officer, really as a chief executive officer, you really have to have a sense of the ecosystem of what operates a brand, because every element of these things contribute to the success of the company. And you can't ignore customer service or your distribution center. All these things play a role in how your brand comes to life, how your brand operates culturally. And so when you think about this chief growth officer, the growth officer, in my definition, is that you're thinking about how is everything growing in alignment? And who is that person orchestrating? It's not just like, I'm going to go and find some new business development and gain revenue by 20% next year. It's like, no, how does that then affect our demand planning?
100%.
And how does that affect our DC? So brands need to be in this ecosystem. And if it's managed by one individual, that's probably the healthier way to do it. Or it's that person that is orchestrating the entire culture to be focused in one direction. And that's another common problem that we see, is that brands tend to not have a plan.
Oof.
And when I say, and it's even more so, I have a saying that I use quite often, and this was something we really focused on when I was at Smartwell with VF, is that if you don't know who you are or where you're going, you're never going to get there.
That's true.
And there's so many companies that don't know who they are to start with, let alone where they want to go. And so as you're able to unify through strategic planning, and I know strategic planning is kind of a hated word to some organizations because it's a lot of work. It doesn't have to be. But if you're leading it as, say, the chief growth officer, you're aligning every one of these silos to go in the same direction to reach the same goals. They're all contributing different things, different expertise, but they're all in alignment and they're all focused on where they want to go, maybe goal setting or whatever it ultimately becomes. And so many companies tend to miss this. They just go day to day. And if you go day to day, this is a Colin Baden saying, if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. Yeah. So if you're just going through day to day and you don't have these plans set forward, then you're never going to get anywhere. And again, those key elements, first, you've got to understand what is the soul and purpose of the brand, not just the products, but what do we want to do to make the world a better place as a brand or a company? Setting that into place, then setting your values or your personality traits, and then setting that strategic plan based on future goals. Those things all need to be orchestrated in such an important way, because if one part of the business isn't aligned, then it's going to cause everything to shift. And so if we do look at this chief growth officer role, chief brand officer role, I think those are really critical on being that orchestrator.
We're not here for the high rollers, snooty wine critics, or long-haul collectors, but we do think it's about time wine cellars turned into swoon-worthy works of art. Our experienced designers will bring your dream wine cellar to life, fitting any sized space and aesthetic requirements in your home. Our craftsmen carefully hand-build your cellar to give you a wine storage space that really feels like you. Visit themoderncellar.com for more information.
Now you're at Rain Eyewear, another eyewear company, a great eyewear company. I love the product. It looks amazing. Everything's really interesting. You were brought in, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe Rain was a D2C, direct-to-consumer brand to begin with, or very close to a direct-to-consumer?
No, it had a wholesale component, but wholesale, was kind of a timing thing. Wholesale wasn't growing quickly. They put more emphasis on direct-to-consumer, and then the pandemic.
Okay.
And so immediately the revenue split was 90% direct to consumer, 10% wholesale. So they literally became a D2C brand in many ways.
It's interesting because in your career, you went from having basically a single market, which is brick and mortar, to operate within, to having this new thing, the internet. And I'm old enough to know when the internet came in and how it changed things. And now you've got two, and obviously the internet can have multiple marketplaces, Amazon and so forth and so on. But you have this digital direct consumer level, and you've got brick and mortar. And we're seeing now, probably sped up, 100% it was sped up from the pandemic. And this is where I work heavily in, because, I've got software that automates the go-to-market process for brick and mortar. And our fundamental reason and our timing was this. We looked at digital marketplace coming in, and we saw brick and mortar slowly falling behind because you can execute so quick in digital. It's quite easy. Like there's work, but you don't have to put anything on a truck. Like it's easy. There's nothing to set up in market. We thought that this was going to take 10 years. And that was probably about 2016. We thought by the time that 2026 came along, that the digital marketplaces would have been developed, that D2C brands would start to see their sales flatten. But the adoption of being able to put your credit card into the computer when the pandemic hit, it's the only thing we can do. And now they're adopted. And so you got all these boomers and this whole section, this whole tier of consumer that no one thought would adopt in, that they would age out of having to be the problematic consumer. So I'm seeing more and more, because of that really accelerated pace, and then because of the hunger of the consumer wanting a better experience for shopping, because they dove headfirst into, I'm alone and I'm going to get the stuff delivered to my door. Brick and mortar needs to be back, and it needs to be good. And we're seeing these brands flatten and then looking at the greener pasture. And if they have a small wholesale business in the brick and mortar world, or if they have solely owned retail where they can stay vertical, they're starting to pour more money into that really, really quickly. You guys would be in that similar position of I'm assuming, I'm making a large assumption that this is similar to you. What are the challenges you see with entering a brand whose presence in the brick and mortar world is low, but very strong online? Like there's a hitch there. There's a real problem. What's your attack vector against that?
So I believe great brands need to be a balance of both brick and mortar and direct to consumer, because ultimately the consumer chooses where they want to shop, and you want to be everywhere that you're going to consider them shopping. Now, of course, we can advertise and we can drive them to your own website for direct consumer conversion, but not all products are good for that. In the case of, say, sunglasses and optical eyewear, you want to try things on. You want to go and see them in person. You want to feel and touch. And so, as important as direct to consumer is for revenue, for loyalty, for bringing consumers deeper into the brand, it's critical. But at the same time, you can't ignore the wholesale side of things. I also look at wholesale as being incredibly important for brand awareness, that they are another touch point for consumers to engage with your brand. And so, again, it's this idea that it's not wholesale or direct consumer. It should be wholesale and direct consumer. And to use the word omni-channel, how do they get along? How do they work well together? The challenge that a lot of brands are having coming out of the pandemic is they did become very reliant on direct consumer, as did their marketing spend. And so you hear about variable marketing spend or performance marketing spend, where you can measure customer acquisition cost or cost per order to a direct sale. And so if you're trying to drive your digital business, your direct to consumer business, and you're growing it at such a rate that you're having to spend your entire marketing budget just to get them to your website. So you're leaving out the old traditional styles of marketing that is driven around discoverability and awareness and putting the brand in places, may it be a simple billboard, a print ad, YouTube opportunities. Getting your brand in front of people in the old traditional ways have kind of gone away. Most marketers become, what I'm finding is they become so analytical, and they're basing their marketing decisions on analysis and performance metrics and transaction versus looking at another spend, another activation points that are pushing the brand from an awareness standpoint, bringing more people in from top of the funnel. And so marketers really have to think in both spaces these days. You can't just think digital, and you're making decisions on analysis, but you also have to continue to hone those marketing instinctual or intuitional skills on where do you want to reach your consumer in a more unique place? How do you bring them in?
Yeah, it's more art than science. I always use like qualitative and quantitative aspects of things. So the quant being the numbers. What is the number telling us? I am, as a business person, more of a qualitative decision-based person. The quant tells us exactly, like, that's the data. It tells us what's going on, but the data can be not right. Like, you can look at data. Like, we all know the examples. This guy's got, 20 million followers. It's like, come on, like, what does your gut tell you? Does that look right? Let's dig into this and actually look at this. And it's your gut. And that's where the art of these things are. And if I find that brick and mortar operates from a high level in the organization with more, they'll look at the data, the KPIs and these different things to make sure that they're going and targeting the right way. But I would assume that you will look at the data and go, and the data is telling you something, but your gut and your experience is telling you something else in a lot of instances. Yeah. And the web brick and mortar, like the web difference between web and brick and mortar is you can rely on the numbers fairly well in that digital marketplace because you've commoditized the brand and you have turned your consumers into zeros and ones. They are slightly different. When you're dealing at retail in brick and mortar, it turns into an art, and it turns into the qualitative component of it is the why. Why is the consumer they're buying? We see it on digital, but why in store? And you can see that and analyze that better at retail. You can see the human interaction. You can talk to the staff. You can do all those things, and it's a tricky thing. And it's funny. This goes way off topic. I wanted to talk to you about something. I look at one of the most interesting things coming out of the pandemic being the distribution of movies in the marketplace. So there was a few real big problems happening before, and I haven't studied this. This is just me. I've been spitballing this around in my own head for a while. There was an insane level of black market pirated movies and stuff floating around. And, these companies were trying to find ways of combating stolen content and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Pandemic hit and they said, wow, no one could go to theaters, right? Which is a thing. And so they consciously looked at this and they said, well, we need to give the consumers their movies in their own house. The technology exists there to do it. We have to change our distribution completely and open up the digital marketplace, but we're going to control it. And by controlling that, we're going to really, really cut the legs out from underneath the pirated movie people, because most honest people will buy the movie for the $20 and watch it in their own home versus going through this insane process of trying to download a torrent and get this stolen content. So in adjusting those things, they then did another thing coming out of the pandemic. And in Canada, and I know it exists in Southern California, it's the very first place I saw it, but your marketplace is so big that it would support it. In Canada, the theaters then that were getting choked because now content is being released in everyone's homes for a fairly economical price. They didn't downgrade the consumer experience. They upgraded the consumer experience. They tore their theaters apart. They put in restaurants. They put in bars. They put in at-your-seat service. They put in heated lounge chairs. They reduced the quantity of the humans in the theater by 50%, 60%. Right. And so they made a conscious decision to release product early digitally, but yet turn around and give this insane, what I would call brick and mortar experience at the movie theater. I'm back in love with going to movie theaters. Mm-hmm. I don't almost even care what the movie is. I saw Avatar the other day and I was like, yeah, it's fine. But it was the hanging out in the seat and the food and that branded, and this was not just one brand. This was an entire industry getting on board, which I couldn't even imagine the complexity and the meetings that would have gone on to be like, oh, by the way, we're going to completely change our industry for the health of the industry. I wish the surf industry would have figured that out before the surf industry collapsed. That would have been amazing. Hey guys, maybe we should make 4 billion t-shirts next year. Let's tamp that down so that we don't have clear out after clear out after clear out for the next 3 years. But that, to me, that's a really interesting talisman in the marketplace against consumer interaction. And kudos to whoever did that. It's brilliant, and they're rolling out everywhere and they're successful. They're doing it. Do you have any, one, what's your opinion about that? Am I right? Am I wrong? Is it a crazy thought?
You're spot on, because I love seeing movies in the theater environment. Obviously, I like the convenience of the home, but I think the bigger story to this is that a lot of times it takes either an economic issue, maybe a recession or a radical pandemic, to break complacency and make business leaders, whatever it is, rethink and do better at what they're doing. It was always that competition is always a good thing. Well, if you have that moment in time like the pandemic where you can use it to the advantage of rethinking your entire business and breaking the complacency, that's what that industry did, and it is better for it, without a doubt.
Where do you see the collision of the digital world and all that stuff coming through? Are you holding an eye against it and making sure that you're tracking it? Are you solely focused on sort of just trying to bring the brands you're working for under control and getting the pipeline smooth? There's always 1,000 things and issues within a brand, but how are you? I'm careful to adopt new technology because it fails in market and then the brands look stupid. Happens a lot. Putting a TV in the marketplace, folks, is a nightmare. One is a nightmare. 1,000 TVs in the marketplace at retailers, you're going to get a call within the first week from 50 of them that they lost their remote. Or instantly. It's crazy. So where do you stand on that sort of tech in the marketplace, future tech potentially? How do you do you prefer to dumb it down and make it simple so it's foolproof, or are you willing to embrace those risks?
To me, I'm probably at this point dumb it down, because there's things that are moving so fast that I don't yet know how it's going to relate to what I do, as an example. Like what can it do to enhance my brand as a consumer experience? And so if I really think on those terms, it helps filter all the stuff that's being thrown at us. So, am I a fan of the metaverse? No. Do I want to live in augmented reality? No, absolutely not. Do people want to do that? No. But if there are ways that it can enhance my brand experience, I would embrace it. You have to look at how does innovation drive your business. But I'm still wait and see, because I haven't seen anything that really blows my mind that also isn't real and authentic. So, I deal in brands that the brand is the lifestyle. You hear so many brands get confused, like saying, oh, we're a lifestyle brand. Really? What does that actually mean? No, great brands create a lifestyle that people want to badge with and belong to. That's what makes a brand great. And so if it can enhance the way I'm crafting a brand to be a lifestyle that people want to be a part of, and I can use a technology to get that across in a different way, some kind of an experience, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the use of badge. The consumer adopting your brand as his or her or their core ethos and identity, while the brand aligns with what they are at that point in time, is a really important thing. So I do a thing, and I welcome you to do it, if you like, but I do a thing. I believe that most people look at me and they go, wow, you work with all these cool companies. You've been connected to Oakley for all these years. And I have like a weird little veneer in front of me and a wall where some things I let go and sometimes I don't, but I always try to kind of be a cool guy. And so I have this thing called the Cool Confessional, which I release just a little bit of a thing that definitively makes me not cool, so that people realize that we're just humans and we move through life. And some of these things, Scott, are, basic. Like I cry every time I sing the national anthem. I can't help it. When it's the Canadian anthem and it comes on, my pride is so high. And these are just things like I'm a human. I also love manis and petties. I go all the time. It's my favorite date night with my wife. My toes right now are painted the new
Pierre
color.
Know that?
Yeah, I'm sure Pierre does. I think it's a fair thing. So today is a semi Oakley centric thing. Some people know, but most people won't. While I was out running around teaching and instructing and selling Oakley and talking about eyewear protection and eye safety and all these things, I actively decided one night after a late night and a Van Halen concert with David Lee Roth, it was great, decided that I needed to fix my garage door out at my ranch. And I very quickly poked my left eye out with a screwdriver. And I knew I shouldn't have been doing it at the time. I did it anyways. I knew, and I haven't told many people, I had a pair of eyewear hanging on my shirt. And the garage door slipped, the screwdriver slipped, my arm jerked. I put my eye into a screwdriver, and now I have a cornea transplant, terrible vision in my left eye from my own stupidity. And so the level of irony that exists in there is so embarrassing, and it's crazy. Like I had to walk into dealers.
I was going to say, this happened while you were sales rep for Oakley.
Yeah, no, I owned my agency for a long time. I'd kind of slowly transitioned out, but I still owned the agency and had someone else running it. But yeah, I clearly poked my own eye out while I was a contracted Oakley agency. And it's embarrassing. And I don't tell many, people are like, what did you do? I poked my eye out. And they're like, oh my God. But I know so much better. Plus I had everything lined up. It was hanging right here, pair of M frames right there that I could have just clear lens put on, but I didn't. So today in the Cool Confessional, I am straight up a fool, and it's not the first time I've hurt myself with my own ego or stupid thinking patterns. So Welcome to my world about being a dope. So if you have anything that you want to, just a little nugget, I always warn guests not to release anything crazy, but if you have anything that you want to get off your chest, it's a perfect time to do it. If not, I understand it is a volunteer situation.
Oh my God. I'm trying to think about what would be a cool confession that is interesting about me, besides probably an injury.
Oh, I know exactly which injury you're talking about.
Which one is that one? Dropping the knife on my foot?
Yeah, that's a beauty.
That is a beauty. Yeah, it's a cool confession. You don't want to be in your kitchen barefooted, because when you drop a butcher knife off your countertop and it drops directly on the top of your foot and severs your big toe tendon,
yeah,
it doesn't do very well. So I guess that's one of my cool confessions from an injury standpoint. But otherwise, I don't know. Probably a cool confession is I'm proud that I actually never went to college or university.
Hey, I love it.
And I've had just the most amazing experiences and mentors along my way to teach me, or probably hone more of my instinctual and intuitional knowledge about building a brand more than anything.
I love it. And you are someone that I look up to, and I believe you to be a groundbreaker in the world of branded marketing. So whatever you did and however you got to the end of your, to where we are today, it was exactly what you should have done. And it was very impressive. And thank you, because again, one day I'm going to try to get Colin on here. I doubt I'll ever talk to Jim. He's a little more gated off, and we're very involved in Jim's own world. But I owe you and the management group at Oakley a debt of gratitude, because you guys gave me the ability to create income and sell a product that was unbelievable, and it was honest, and it was amazing, literally in every single way. It was fantastic. So thank you for your time. Best of luck with all your future endeavors. Your current company, Rain Eyewear, is amazing. I was
recently just pulled into another one, so I'm doing dual CMO roles of another brand for you to research called Linksoul.
Linksoul. Okay. What's the URL for the
Linksoul as well? It was founded by John Ashworth. Talk about a cool, soulful golf brand. I'm
awesome.
Really, really loving its positioning. So yeah,
I love it.
For Linksoul.
How do you get to these two companies that you're currently at right now? What's the URLs for them? Is it just raineyewear.com?
Yeah, Rain, RAEN.com.
Okay.
And Linksoul, LINKSOUL.com.
Amazing. Everyone go check those out. Scott, thank you for your time. It was an absolute pleasure. When I get a little farther down the pipe and I got a few more of these, I'm going to have about 1 million questions for you. So I'm going to pin it right now to reserve a future episode to go over more complex marketing things, because you are my sounding board for what is right and wrong.
Well, I look forward to it, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Scott. Thank you, and enjoy the weekend.
Thanks. You too, Jamie.
Take care. Bye-bye.